Welcome to Module 6 of Apologetics for the 21st Century. In this particular session, we're going to be talking about the issues raised by science and how some people believe that science has disproved or cast doubt on the validity of the Christian faith. So let's get started. Basic issue is that many people object to Christian faith because they believe that faith in supernatural things is irrational, and or they may believe that science disproves the miracles spoken of in the Bible. So have science and technology disproved the Bible and cast doubt on the Christian faith? The issue may sometimes be expressed in a statement like this: if you can prove Christianity to be scientifically true, then I will believe. Let's give a definition then of science. Science are principles and procedures for the systematic pursuit of knowledge involving the recognition and formulation of a problem, the collection of data through observation and experiment, and the formulation and testing of hypotheses. That's according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So that's the definition given in the dictionary. Let's talk about the strengths of the scientific method. The scientific method is excellent for identifying problems in the natural world. It's also very good at gathering information, using natural methodology, measuring natural things, measuring physical things, and so forth. It's good at forming and testing hypotheses. And the way it does that, hypothesis is a working, idea of how something happens or how something works. It does that through observation of the natural world, of physical operation of things. It does it through repetitive experiments, repetitive observations and experiments. And then it also does that through causing interventions in natural things. In other words, they'll maybe add a chemical to a solution to see what that does, or they may try doing a physical action a different way in order to see what happens there. So in other words, an intervention is an experiment when you add an element or you add a different condition to the original observation. So scientific method is really good. I mean, through the scientific method, our world is a very different place. We have all sorts of computer technology, for instance. I mean, you're using a computer at this very moment, and that's all the result of science and then its application in technology. And much of what science has done has been really beneficial for our daily lives. Although obviously science has its dark side as well, but science has been a very, very good thing. Hypotheses that can be proven through this method are considered scientific laws. In other words, nobody would say that gravity is a theory. Gravity is a scientific law. There's very, very little doubt that what we're getting there is accurate information, and it's so accurate that we would just say this is a law of the universe. Hypotheses that cannot be absolutely proven but seem to be supported by a large amount of evidence are classified as scientific theories. For example, the theory of evolution. And you can't absolutely prove it because nobody was back in the beginning or during the many, long periods of history to see evolution taking place. But there seems to be some evidence behind it, and there's enough evidence for people to classify it as a theory. What are the limitations of the scientific method? Well, science has little to say about things that cannot be physically observed, measured, or quantified. It can't say anything about things that are not part of the physical world. Science can attempt to describe how things work in the physical world, but sometimes they can't even explain why things work that way in the physical world. And I mean, why things should exist at all, why gravity operates. I mean, I don't know that there's any explanation for why gravity operates. They can talk maybe a little bit about how it operates, but why gravity exists as a basic component of the natural world, or the natural universe, nobody really seems to understand that. Science may dispute supernatural phenomena such as people's claims to miracles or the Bible's record of miracles, but it cannot disprove that they may occur on occasion. In other words, if miracles are a very rare suspension of the laws of nature that occur under very specific conditions, but that they cannot be predicted, and that usually there's nobody around to make a scientific experiment when such things happen, then just because science can't do that doesn't mean that miracles don't exist. Science seems to indicate that miracles don't occur on a very routine basis. I mean, I think science has shown that natural laws are behind most of what happens in the universe, but it cannot absolutely 100% disprove that no miracle has ever occurred. Let's talk about the nature of reality. Human beings function in at least two aspects of reality on a daily basis. Almost all of us, well, we all function in the natural aspect of reality. We all live in the natural world where gravity operates, where chemical processes take place, where, the sun rises and sets, and, the day and the night occur and all that sort of thing. But most of us operate, well, I think all of us, whether we know it or not, but most of us operate in the supernatural aspect of reality as well. We talk about love. We talk about moral principles. We talk about ethical right and wrong. We talk about, things that happen seemingly that don't directly get caused by natural laws. We talk about things being a strange coincidence, or we talk about this happened at just the right time. We're sort of implying by that, I think, much of the time, that there are things happening in our experience that are not just the physical world in operation. It is virtually universal for people to deal with both aspects of reality simultaneously. Nobody lives purely by science. Even atheists talk about love and justice. And you can't measure a kilogram of justice or a liter of love. And yet, even most atheists believe that there are those non-physical but very real qualities that exist in our lives. God, the natural aspect of reality would say that, God and the supernatural are not directly part of routine experience. The natural aspect of reality says that almost all of the time it's nature at work. It's the natural laws that are at play. They would say things operate through these natural causes, and that people can comprehend the natural world through facts and scientific inquiry. In other words, we can know an awful lot about our world and how it works and so forth by using scientific method and rational thought. But in the natural aspect of reality, the overall meaning and purpose of events is often obscure. We don't often, know the larger meaning of why something happened, or, why this terrible event may have occurred, or this amazing event may have occurred. We don't seem to sense a lot of purpose, overall purpose, to life and the universe simply through the scientific method. It just isn't built. It isn't the type of thing that can detect those sorts of answers. The supernatural aspect of reality does deal with some of these issues that science cannot detect. It allows for God and the supernatural to be experienced in a much more direct fashion, that through prayer and through other kinds of spiritual experiences, the supernatural can be accessed and God can be known. Both natural and supernatural causes are possible for events. That, most of the time natural laws are at work, but there are times when those laws seem to be overridden by some kind of supernatural event. Reality can be comprehended by both faith and reason. So not only can science and reason, give us a picture of what's happening in the world around us, but faith also gives us access to things that are not physical, that cannot be seen through science or reason. And the supernatural aspect of reality does provide some hints, at least, of an overall meaning and purpose to life, and that the events that happen to us can be understood, at least partly, as fitting into some larger scheme that's outside of the physical world. Christianity deals largely with things that cannot be observed, such as faith, inner peace, morality, the afterlife, and the supernatural. And while these qualities and experiences are a real part of life, such things can never be proven or observed by the scientific method because they just cannot be measured or quantified according to, the laws. Like, we would measure some liquid, or we would weigh some substance, or we would look through some instrument to observe something happening in the physical world. By definition, those kinds of things just can't be measured by science. Well, how do science and religion interact? Many people believe that religion and science are opposing worldviews. But according to the pioneering specialist in the interaction of science and religion, Dr. Ian Barber, who I believe he died in the early 2000s. It was a real loss to the world when he passed away. Dr. Ian Barber said there are four main models for how science and religion can interact. And in other words, people over the years have tended to see the relationship between science and religion in four distinct ways, and each of them may or may not have their merits. The first is the conflict model we'll talk about, and then the independence model, the dialogue model, and the integration model. So let's tackle each one of these very briefly. The conflict model is what usually makes the newspapers, the nightly news, the religion or science blogs that are trying to bash the other side. So the conflict model is very popular because it's very sensational. And the conflict model says that scientific thought and religious belief are incompatible. They're in conflict with each other. They're in competition for the hearts and minds of people. And only one worldview can be correct. Either science is correct or religion is correct, but not the other one. One is either right, and the other one must be wrong, but both cannot be right in any way. And so it pictures science and religion as always at each other's throats. The independence model says that science and religion are different ways of accessing completely separate aspects of reality. It says that science doesn't have anything to say about religious issues, and religion has little or nothing to say about scientific facts. You might summarize this view as saying something like, let science do what it does best without religious interference. And let religion freely concentrate on what it does best, which is meeting people's spiritual needs. So that's the independence model. Then there's the dialogue model, which says that both science and religion are valid and necessary ways of accessing reality as a whole. Because of that, they can be mutually beneficial. In other words, the two disciplines can learn from each other about understanding reality. And when they do that, they give a picture of reality that's much more complete, much more holistic. Pope John Paul II said this. I believe he was an advocate of the dialogue model. He said, science can purify religion from error and superstition, but religion can purify science from idolatry and false absolutes. So science can keep religion from going off in directions that are just kind of foolish, but religion can keep science from worshiping itself and from making statements that it really can't prove about reality. Then there's the integration model, which says that neither science nor religion is as different from the other as people might believe. Human efforts to access and make sense of reality, in a sense, use essentially the same methods and procedures for finding the truth. Reason, intuition, and even faith play roles in both disciplines. I mean, scientists often operate off hunches. They might have some kind of intuitive idea that maybe this is what's going on. They place their faith in their instruments and in the fact that their senses can actually take in real information about the world. And how does a scientist know that he's not having a hallucination on an LSD trip, or that he's not a crazy person in an asylum? He's assuming that he's a sane person, or she is a sane person, and that their senses are giving accurate information. That's a step of faith. And people don't think of it that way, but it really is. There's no way to prove that you're a sane person and that your senses are giving you accurate information. But so science, there's a certain amount of faith in the scientific process, certain amount of intuition in the scientific process. But even religion uses reason. I mean, read theology, a theology book someday. And theology makes many very logical, rational deductions based upon certain premises. You know, theology is an attempt to string biblical information together in some kind of orderly system. That's what theology is. And the Bible is not a book of theology. It's a book of stories about people's lives. It's a book about spiritual statements. It's a book about all sorts of things that God has done in the world, and the nature of God and all that sort of thing. But it's not a theological system. Theologians have to use logic and reason to put the biblical information together into some kind of system that answers basic questions. So both disciplines use kind of the same tools in many ways to achieve some sort of picture of reality. How do science and religion interact? Well, the Bible affirms that both faith and reason are valid ways of understanding the cosmos, that you need both. God never says turn your brain off, but that you also need to exercise faith when it comes to things that your brain can't figure out. Some things must be understood through faith. John 20:29 says that he wrote these things that you might believe. You got to exercise some faith. And while other things have to be understood through reason and experience. For example, let me just read Psalm 19, 1 through 3, where it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech, and night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, and their words to the end of the world." Well, what's that saying? It's saying that you can use your senses, your eyes, your ears, many things like that, to sense the presence of God, to access the glory of God in the way that he has made things. And that's, reason and experience can, in some sense, access at least some aspects of God. Romans 1:19 through 20 says that what can be known about God is plain to people if they just use their senses. When they observe the amazing way that the world is put together, it can lead them to a knowledge of God. And Psalm 14 is the only place where it seems like the Bible takes a conflict stance towards those who scoff at God and his authority. The Bible is not anti-science. The only time when it speaks anything like that is in Psalm 14:1, where it says, "The fool says in his heart there's no God." When science is used as a tool by people who refuse to believe in God, then yeah, there's conflict. But not because of science. It's because of the prior choice that people have made to use science in a way that excuses their disbelief. Although the Bible is not anti-science, it was never intended to be a scientific description of the natural world. So keep in mind that the books of the Bible were written long before the beginnings of the scientific method, which developed in the 11th century AD. So in other words, science has only been developing for the last, maybe 800-900 years. And the Bible was written, more than 1,000 years before that. So, I mean, you can't expect the Bible to speak on a level that only 21st century people would know. It wasn't going to jump over all those centuries and not speak to people who couldn't understand it. The Bible is written in a way that any human being can understand. I mean, think about the people without much education, even today. But the Bible speaks very clearly to them because it speaks on a very basic human level. It's almost like people who have a scientific background are expecting that God is going to speak in a way that will only satisfy them and that's going to be confusing to everybody else. But no, God has to speak to them only. And because he's spoken on a basic level, that they're not going to accept that. As if really kind of they're the ones that God has to satisfy. So because the Bible was not written as a book of science, people should not expect it to communicate using the kind of scientific precision that sometimes we demand in the 21st century. On the other hand, people should not assume that the Bible is always unscientific or that it contains factual errors. For example, the Bible often uses descriptive language rather than scientific terminology. For example, Ecclesiastes 1:5 says the sun rises and sets. Well, we know that that's not, it appears to come up in the east and go down in the west, and and all of that. That's what it appears to do from a purely human perspective. So the Bible oftentimes just describes what people observe in their normal lives rather than what may technically appear, which, there's a lot of technical language we could use, but, it has to do with the orbit or the rotation of the earth. So the earth is moving and it's, sometimes it's moving towards, the side of the earth you're on is rotating towards the sun, and sometimes it's rotating away from the sun. So in daylight hours, you're rotating towards, and in the night hours, you're rotating away. And but the Bible doesn't ever use that language because it's silly. We don't even use it as scientific people. We don't even say that when we're talking to one another. We talk about sunrise and sunset just like everybody else does. So why condemn the Bible for doing what we do ourselves? In the past, some people thought the earth was flat. Now, by the way, I just want to say that many scholars, even in the Middle Ages, understood that the Bible was a sphere. There were many ignorant people, I suppose, I should say uneducated people that believed that believed the earth was flat. But lots of scholars throughout history, even back to the ancient Greeks, understood that the earth was a sphere, not a flat pancake. But even though some people thought the earth was flat, the Bible has always said it's spherical. It says God sits above the circle of the earth in Isaiah 40:22. The Bible describes many other facts and processes that have only recently been discovered by science, like the hydrological cycle. In Ecclesiastes 1:7, it says all streams flow into the sea, and yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. So it's talking about how, water comes up, evaporates from the oceans, rains on the land, flows down the streams into the sea. It talks about the vital function of the blood. The life of a creature is in the blood, Leviticus 17:11. Some people claim that the theory of evolution has disproved the Bible's account of creation in Genesis 1 and 2. And because it has done that, it greatly calls into question the rest of the Bible as well. So some people use the theory of evolution kind of as a weapon to destroy the whole Bible. And some Christian believers actually, believe it or not, some Christian believers have reacted, well, it's no surprise that some Christian believers have reacted strongly to the claims of evolutionary theory. But it's fair to remember that other Christians have been able to accommodate at least some ideas of evolution into their Christian faith. So it's by no means true that just because some people believe in evolution that they can't be Christians. So some Christians have been able to just incorporate some of that into their faith and go right on without a problem. Although some Christians have very much fought the idea of evolution. Let's talk about the theory of evolution, what it is. All life on Earth evolved gradually, according to the theory, from a common ancestor over billions of years. And the way that evolution happened was through adaptation and the process of natural selection. All right? But there are problems with the theory of evolution. The theory of evolution is by no means a slam dunk. Although, to listen to the media, read the news, Read educational textbooks, all of that. You would think it was a slam dunk, issues over. There are some serious questions that are still being asked about the theory. For example, the sudden appearance of advanced life forms with few of any transitional forms. I mean, the fossil record does show lots of different variety. What it doesn't tend to show is that, the evolution of transitional figures. In other words, things that still are partly like the original organism, but they're becoming something else. The fossil in the picture, Archaeopteryx, was once thought to be the transitional figure between lizards and birds, but that doesn't, what they found now is that it actually was a distinct species itself. It wasn't any kind of transitional species at all. It was a very much its own thing. The Cambrian explosion in the fossil record tends to show that species appeared suddenly, that they didn't appear as transitional forms. I mean, just this long series of things that were in development from one thing to another. You don't see that. You see distinct things appearing very suddenly. So the traditional idea, at least, of evolution just doesn't seem to be shown in the fossil record. Darwin himself, Charles Darwin, the author of the theory of evolution, said, "By this theory, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. Why do we not find them embedded in the crust of the earth?" In other words, he was perplexed that geology did not show what he predicted the theory would show. There's also the issue of irreducible complexity. Michael Behe is a scientist of our own times, and he defines irreducible complexity as a single system composed of several interacting parts that contribute to the basic function of that system, and where the removal of any one of the parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. Prime example that he uses is the mousetrap. Mousetrap has several basic parts that interact. The base, which, the wooden base, the catch on the base, the spring, the hammer, and the hold down bar. Okay, those are all the basic parts that interact to cause the entire system to function. But you can't have a mousetrap if any one of these parts is missing. If you didn't have the base, the other parts wouldn't function. If you didn't have the hold down, bar, you wouldn't have the function. They all have to be working exactly together as they were designed for the system to work. And so Michael Behe's point is that evolution of species expects that all the systems that make the cell function and all the systems that make a particular species thrive, they all have to be in place at once. That you can't have, for example, I think the great example of that was something called a bombardier beetle. The beetle that scares off its enemies by, I guess, ejecting a certain kind of poisonous substance or toxic substance from its body. But there's certain basic things inside the beetle that put that system together. That system is dependent upon a number of things that if you remove any one of those things, that wouldn't happen. And so, in other words, for a system like that to be in place, it all has to be together in the very beginning. You can't have it slowly developing. You can't have it slowly, this part developed, and then 1,000 years later, the next part of the system developed. No, it's all got to be there at once. Evolution doesn't seem to account for that. Time. Many people think that there's just not enough time in the universe for random chance to produce the intricate design that we see around us. It might produce one species developing, but all of these species, it doesn't seem to be enough time for all of these things to have developed, at least according to the theory as it now is. The evolutionist Julian Huxley said the odds of the horse species evolving. Now, Huxley was not a Christian. The odds of the horse species evolving were 1 in 10 to the 3 millionth power. In other words, no, there's no chance. Statistically, that's zero. The Earth simply has not existed long enough for random chance by itself to produce the amazing complexity of animal and plant life. So when you've got Julian Huxley saying that even one species, it's just it's virtually impossible that evolution could have produced the horse from its original beginnings, then you've got a serious problem with the theory, but it's usually just brushed over. Biogenesis. I mean, where does life come from in the very beginning? Let's assume evolution happened as the theory said. But how did life begin in the first place? The law of biogenesis states that life comes only from life. Evolution, if you have evolution without God involved, evolution can't explain how non-life was able to produce life, how life came from just, elements, chemicals. And nobody has ever observed chemicals giving rise to life forms. It just never has been observed, And science is about evidence. So if the theory demands that at some point this freak thing happened, that chemicals produced what we would think of as life, but it's never ever been observed, then you can't say that evolution on that basis is a fact. You have to say it's a theory because you don't have enough supporting evidence to prove it. And then, of course, the obscurity of cosmic origins. Since no one was present to observe what actually happened in the beginning, both the claim for evolution and the claim for creation must be taken on faith. So, what the Bible says about the creation, nobody can go back and prove that. You accept it on faith or you don't. But the beginnings of the universe, how the universe came to be, how life came to be, nobody was there to see how it happened. So therefore, if you accept the theory of evolution or some kind of other explanation for how things got here other than God, then you either accept that on faith or you don't. But nobody can prove it because nobody was there. It seems like we always have to fall back on what we call the best explanation of evidence. A common sense approach in solving the problem of cosmic origins will seek the explanation that best fits all of the evidence. The best explanation will offer the most complete description both of how and why any phenomenon occurs, and will be harder to disprove compared to other theories. So you look around, and if you look at everything, you look at what science can tell us, what your logic and reason can tell you, and what your eyes perceive of the effects of the supernatural world. It seems to me like the best explanation is that some powerful thing made this universe, and he's built into it certain natural laws, and he's given it life the opportunity to and the ability to generate new life and perhaps even adapt to its circumstances. That seems to be the best explanation of all the evidence. And of course, I'm a biblical Christian, so I believe that what the Bible says is accurate as well. But anything less than that seems to not account for all of the evidence. Given the evidence that the universe seems to be fine-tuned to support human life, that human beings almost universally report a spiritual dimension to existence, the best explanation seems to be that the universe has a designer and that people have a sense of the designer's presence. So let's sum this up. Perhaps the best way to approach the question of whether science has disproved Christian faith is to understand several things. Science and Christianity are not necessarily incompatible. They're not necessarily at each other's throats. Both have extremists in their ranks. There are extreme science people, scientists, and extreme, religion people who have agendas to minimize the influence of the other. They're trying to destroy the other camp. Both science and religion have certain limitations. I mean, Christianity, probably couldn't have designed the computer. Science did that. But science can't explain why things happen the way they do and why people sense a pattern and a meaning beyond the physical world. And each, science and religion, can inform the other. Each one can fill in some gaps in the other's ability to perceive and access reality. So there's a lot more could be said, but that's enough for our time, and we will see you in Module 7.